The sun rose over the village of Aniba, painting the mud walls of the houses with a golden glow. Life in the market began before the first cock crowed. Farmers carried baskets of yams, fishermen hauled nets heavy with tilapia, and traders shouted prices into the thick morning air. But there was one corner of the market that drew people more than any other, and it belonged to a woman named Adaku. No one knew where she came from. She had no relatives in the village, no husband, no children, no visible helpers. Yet every dawn she appeared with her massive iron pot, and within minutes the fragrance of her cooking spread like a charm through every alley and compound. Spices blended in perfect harmony: hot peppers, smoky ginger, earthy groundnuts, and something else, something people could never place but could never resist. By the time her ladle touched the first bowl, the line stretched longer than the goat sellers, the cloth merchants, even the palm wine stand. Her food had a power that words struggled to capture. Those who tasted it said it warmed their bones and calmed their spirit. Hunters swore it gave them sharper eyes. Farmers claimed their hoes felt lighter after eating it, and children licked bowls clean until their mothers scolded them for greed. But no matter how many mouths she fed, her pot never emptied. People found this odd but explained it away as the blessing of the gods. After all, who would question food that tasted like salvation? Yet beneath admiration stirred envy. Other food sellers, who spent hours pounding yam and grilling fish, watched in despair as their customers deserted them. Their stalls, once busy, grew silent. Some whispered that Adaku's meals were not natural. How could one woman feed an entire market without buying from farmers or butchers? They had never seen her at the river, nor bargaining at the spice stall. She seemed to exist only in the market square, and once the sun set, she disappeared as if swallowed by the shadows. The first rumor began with a careless remark. A mother noticed her son had grown restless since eating Adaku's stew. He craved nothing else, refused his own mother's food, and woke at night with sweat pouring from his body. She told her neighbors, who added their own suspicions. Soon the whispers spread like wildfire. Adaku was not just a food seller. She was a woman of dark powers. But hunger is louder than fear. Even as tongues wagged, people still rushed to her stall every morning, unable to resist the pull of her flavors. One evening, when the market was closing and traders tied their bundles, a young man named Obina lingered behind. He had eaten from Adaku's stall for weeks and could no longer sleep without the taste of her stew on his tongue. That night he decided to follow her, hoping to discover where she lived and perhaps learn her secret. He waited in the shadows until she finished serving the last bowl. With the market nearly empty, she covered her pot, lifted it with surprising ease, and began to walk. Obina crept after her, careful not to step on dry leaves that might betray him. She did not take the main road leading to the village compounds. Instead, she slipped into a narrow path that wound toward the forest. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. The sound of crickets grew faint, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The young man's heart pounded, but curiosity drove him forward. After a long walk, Adaku entered a clearing. In the middle stood a stone altar blackened by fire. Around it were clay jars, each marked with strange symbols that glistened under the moonlight. Obina hid behind a tree, eyes wide as Adaku placed her pot on the altar and began to chant words in a language he did not know. From the earth beneath the altar came a rumble, and slowly the ground split open. Obina bit his lip to stop a cry from escaping. What he saw next would never leave his mind. From the crack in the earth rose a figure wrapped in burial cloth. The cloth was stained, the body stiff, yet Adaku greeted it calmly, as though welcoming an old friend. She dipped her ladle into the pot, scooped out steaming stew, and poured it over the body. The cloth hissed as if touched by fire, and the air filled with a thick, metallic scent. Adaku whispered, and the stew soaked into the corpse like water into dry earth. Then, as if satisfied, she pushed the body back into the ground and sealed the crack with her bare hands. The earth closed, as if it had never opened. Obina staggered back, his stomach twisting. The food? The endless pot, the irresistible flavor. Suddenly, everything made sense. He ran back toward the village, his feet stumbling on the uneven path. But when he reached the safety of his compound, his mouth refused to form words. He tried to speak, to shout what he had seen, but no sound came out. His throat burned, yet silence smothered him. He collapsed, trembling, realizing that whatever power Adaku carried had sealed his voice. The next morning, he was found shaking in his hut, pointing desperately to his throat. His family rushed him to the healer, who examined him and shook his head. "This is no sickness of man," he said gravely. "This is the hand of spirits." Word spread quickly that Obinna had lost his voice after trailing Adaku. Fear deepened, but so did fascination. Some swore never to eat her food again, but most ignored the warnings, telling themselves that Obinna must have angered her. Hunger, once again, triumphed over fear. Still, there were those who could not forget. A group of women whose stalls had been emptied by Adaku's success gathered in secret. They were determined to uncover her secret and end her hold over the village. But they did not realize that Adaku already knew their thoughts. Her eyes, always calm in the market, hid an awareness sharper than any blade. She had seen envy growing, and she was prepared, for behind every spoonful she served lay a bargain. And soon the village would learn that the price of her food was heavier than coins. The days that followed were heavy with suspicion. Though Adaku still served food every morning, and though her line of customers still wound across the dusty market square, there was an uneasiness in the air. The story of Obinna's silence clung to the market like a stubborn smell, one that would not be washed away by the sweet smoke of her stew. People lowered their voices when speaking of her, yet still they carried their bowls to her stall, as if unable to break free from her spell. Hunger, after all, is stronger than fear when fear is invisible. The women who had gathered in secret to discuss her grew restless. Mama Ifeoma, the oldest among them, had sold bean cakes at the market for 30 years, and never before had she seen her customers vanish so quickly. She spoke with a bitterness that came from years of honest labor now turned useless. She and the others swore they would discover Adaku's truth, even if it meant risking the wrath of whatever forces protected her. They began by watching her stall more closely. They noticed that no matter how many bowls she sold, her pot never emptied. They saw how the smoke from her fire curled in unnatural ways, always bending toward the forest rather than drifting into the sky. They watched how people left her stall with glazed eyes, chewing slowly, as though the food did not just fill their bellies, but touched something deeper, something hidden. One night, 3 of the women decided to follow her, just as Obinna had done. They waited until the market was empty, until the moon cast pale light over the clay roofs, and then they trailed behind her as she carried her iron pot into the forest. Their hearts thumped in unison, each step louder than the last, but they kept to the shadows. Adaku moved with strange grace, as if the darkness parted for her. She reached the clearing where the altar stood, set down her pot, and began to chant. The women crouched behind bushes, eyes wide, as they saw the ground split open once more. From beneath rose another body wrapped in cloth, its limbs stiff, its face hidden. The smell of damp earth mixed with the aroma of her stew, creating a stench that made the women press cloth to their noses. They watched as she poured stew onto the body, murmuring words none of them understood. The stew sizzled against the cloth, and the air shimmered as if the clearing itself was holding its breath. Then the body sank back into the earth. The crack closed, and silence returned. Adaku lifted her pot and walked away, calm as though she had only watered a garden. The women trembled. What they had witnessed was beyond their comprehension. They hurried back to the village, clutching one another's arms. By dawn, they had spread the story among themselves, swearing to keep it secret until they decided what to do. But secrets, like smoke, rarely stay contained. Soon whispers slithered through the market. Adaku cooked with the dead. Some said she fed on corpses. Others claimed she trapped souls in her pot. Fear spread, but so did doubt. Her food still tasted divine, and no one had ever seen her harm anyone openly. The villagers argued. Some said the women lied out of jealousy. Others insisted that too many signs pointed towards something unnatural. The market became divided, those who swore by her food and those who began to avoid her stall. But Adaku was not blind. She noticed the empty spaces where certain villagers once stood in her line. She saw the wary glances and heard the sudden silences when she passed. She knew the women had betrayed her secret, and though her face remained calm, her heart hardened. One evening, when the market was empty and the moon hung low, Adaku sought out the women who had spied on her. They sat together, their voices hushed, when a cold wind blew through the room though no door had opened. The lamp flickered, and there she was, standing at the threshold, her pot beside her. She did not shout. She did not strike. She simply spoke in a voice that carried the weight of 1,000 shadows. She told them they had trespassed where their feet did not belong. That curiosity could be a hunger more dangerous than any appetite. The women shivered as her words coiled around them. Before they could reply, she lifted her hand, and silence swallowed the room. Their lips moved, but no sound came out. They tried to scream, to pray, to beg, but their voices were stolen. The next morning, the market saw them sitting in their stalls, eyes wide, mouths open, but not a word leaving their tongues. They gestured desperately, but the villagers stepped back in fear. It was clear to all who had done this. No one dared confront Adaku directly. Yet whispers turned into certainty. She wielded powers no human should. And yet still, people ate. The hunger was too strong, the flavor too unforgettable. It was as if her food bound them with invisible chains. Even those who feared her found themselves drifting back to her stall, coins clutched in trembling hands. The line remained, the pot remained, and the fear grew alongside the craving. Among the villagers was a young woman named Ngozi. Unlike others, she had never eaten from Adaku's stall, for her grandmother had warned her long ago that food too sweet to explain must never cross her lips. She watched as her neighbors became weaker in spirit, more restless, more dependent on Adaku's meals. She saw the silenced women, their eyes pleading for freedom, and she felt anger rise in her chest. Ngozi decided she could no longer stay silent. She went to the elders, urging them to act. But the elders were divided. Some were already bound by Adaku's meals, their bellies craving her stew even as they sat in judgment. Others feared her too much to take a stand. Ngozi's words fell like seeds on hard ground, and no action was taken. But Ngozi was not discouraged. She sought out a native doctor in a neighboring village. He listened to her tale and nodded gravely. He told her that Adaku was no ordinary woman, but a servant of ancient forces, feeding not just bodies, but spirits. He warned that confronting her would be dangerous, perhaps fatal. Yet he gave Ngozi a charm, woven from cowrie shells and herbs, telling her it would shield her from Adaku's gaze. Armed with this, Ngozi returned, determined to expose the truth. She knew she would need evidence, something undeniable that even the most bewitched villager could not ignore. So she waited, watching, planning. She would follow Adaku at night, but unlike the others, she would be protected. On the third night, when the moon was brightest, she trailed behind Adaku into the forest. Her heart pounded, but the charm at her waist glowed faintly, and she felt courage steady her steps. She reached the clearing, crouched low, and watched as Adaku summoned another body from the earth. This time, instead of hiding, Ngozi pulled out a small recording device she had borrowed from a trader who visited from the city. She captured the entire ritual, the chanting, the stew poured over the corpse, the earth sealing shut. Her hands shook, but she held firm. When Adaku finished and turned to leave, Ngozi slipped back through the shadows, clutching the device. She knew she had proof now, undeniable proof. But she also knew Adaku would not rest if she discovered what had been taken. The battle between hunger and truth had only begun, and the village was about to face its darkest reckoning. The night after Ngozi recorded Adaku's ritual, the air in the village felt heavier, as though the trees themselves leaned closer to listen. She slept little, clutching the small device to her chest. By dawn, she walked to the palace of the village chief. The courtyard was already busy with traders, drummers, and petitioners, but when Ngozi entered with trembling determination, silence followed her. She bowed before the chief and begged him to gather the elders. With hesitant curiosity, they assembled in the council hut. Ngozi placed the device before them, pressed the button, and let the images play. Gasps erupted as they saw Adaku chanting, the ground opening, the corpse rising. The stew poured like libation over the dead. Some covered their eyes, others muttered prayers, but all saw what could not be denied. The truth had finally been captured, no longer just rumor or envy, but visible evidence. The chief sat still for a long time, his face pale. Then he declared that Adaku must be seized and questioned. Messengers were sent through the village, and a crowd quickly gathered in the square. When Adaku appeared with her pot, the people did not rush to line up as they once did. Instead, they stood back, eyes sharp, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. Soldiers surrounded her stall. Adaku looked at them with calm eyes. She did not run, did not plead. She merely asked why she was being confronted. The chief ordered the recording to be played again, this time before the entire crowd. Murmurs turned into shouts. Fear mixed with fury. Mothers clutched their children. Men spat into the dust. Elders shook their heads in sorrow. But Adaku did not tremble. She raised her hands slowly, and the crowd fell quiet. Her voice was steady, almost soothing. She told them they had eaten from her pot for years, grown strong, survived famine, and celebrated festivals with joy. She asked if any had died from her food, if any had truly suffered. She reminded them that without her meals, many would have starved. Her words carried weight, and some in the crowd wavered. Hunger is a powerful memory, and gratitude can blind as much as fear. Ngozi stepped forward, lifting the charm the native doctor had given her. She shouted that survival bought with the dead was no survival at all, that the spirits had been mocked, and that the village was now cursed. Her voice cracked with anger, but her courage lit a fire in those who had doubted. The crowd turned again, this time with resolve. Stones were raised, fists clenched, soldiers advanced. Daku's calm faded, her eyes darkened, and the air grew cold. She struck her palm against the earth, and the ground trembled. From the soil burst skeletal hands, grasping ankles, pulling people to their knees. Screams filled the square. The sky itself seemed to dim, and smoke rose from her pot, though no fire burned beneath it. Adaku's voice rang like thunder, declaring that no mortal could break her covenant with the forces she served. But Ngozi did not flinch. She clutched the Bible her grandmother had left her, lifted it high, and began to pray aloud. Her words clashed with Adaku's chants, light against darkness, faith against hunger. The charm at her waist glowed, forming a shield that held back the skeletal hands clawing for her. The villagers, seeing her stand firm, found courage. They joined in prayer, some reciting verses, others crying out to the Creator for deliverance. The battle raged, unseen forces colliding in the square. The pot shook violently, stew spilling onto the dust and sizzling like acid. Adaku shrieked as cracks spread across the iron surface. With one final cry, Ngozi hurled the charm into the pot. A blinding light burst forth, so bright that villagers covered their faces. When the light faded, the pot lay shattered, its contents dissolved into black smoke that rose and vanished into the sky. Adaku fell to the ground, her strength gone. The soldiers bound her, but she no longer struggled. Her eyes, once sharp and calm, now held only emptiness. She was taken to the chief's palace, where she was locked away. Yet she did not last long. By the next sunrise, she was found lifeless, her body cold, her face twisted as though she had been strangled by invisible hands. Many said the spirits she had served had claimed her at last. The village mourned those who had been ensnared by her food, those who had lost their voices, those who had wasted away in restless hunger. They honored Ngozi as a savior, praising her bravery, her faith, and her refusal to bow before fear. The chief offered her a place among his advisors, and the elders blessed her name. From that day forward, no one in Oniba trusted food without knowing its source. Street stalls were watched carefully, vendors questioned about their ingredients, and the memory of Adaku's pot lingered like smoke long after it had vanished. The tale spread beyond Oniba. Travelers carried it to neighboring villages, warning others that not all flavors are gifts, and not every sweet taste comes from honest hands. Across the land, people repeated the lesson. Hunger can make us blind, but truth must open our eyes before it is too late. And so the story ended, not with the clatter of spoons, but with the echo of caution. For in every market, behind every tempting smell, there may be a secret best left untasted.